To bring in Betsy Woodruff.
Yeah, Betsy, I wanted to ask you about the sort of how the interplay between the White House and the Hill is working. I know that's something you report on a lot. It was fascinating to watch the president go to the GOP yesterday. He barely talked, as far as we know, about immigration. He got a standing ovation. He mocked Mark Sanford, who wasn't there. He was not confronted any questions about this. But it's very clear, if you look at the statements from members of Congress, both the Senate and particularly vulnerable House Republicans, they understand that this looks terrible. The politics are against them on this. I wonder what that dynamic, as far as you can tell and what your reporting says, between the Republican leadership and the White House has been on this.
They've been getting hundreds of calls without that much of sort of an organized grassroots effort to push that response. It's something that's been overwhelming some offices. And I think the tension here between the Hill and the White House is probably at a level that it hasn't been in recent weeks. The reality is that particularly for these vulnerable Republicans, many of which are from states that have high immigrant populations, the images that we've seen, all the reporting, the audio of children screaming have been separating from their parents, that's something voters really relate to. This story is something that's very urgent and very pressing for voters, particularly for independent and for swing voters. So people on the House, especially House Republicans who are worried that their chamber is going to flip, are probably more concerned than they have been in recent weeks about the impact of this news cycle on their ability to keep the House under control. And they blame the White House for that. They see this very much as the responsibility of the White House, the responsibility of the Justice Department, essentially taking the Republican Party and turning it the party of family separation.
Betsy, hold on, though. What was the deal then with that spectacle we just saw in the White House a moment ago with all those Republican lawmakers praising the president for dealing with this issue, and even Lindsey Graham, who said this was of the president's own making, trying to find a way to be complimentary of him. What do you make of that?
I think there's a concern among certain House Republicans, like the ones who are in the White House, about publicly distancing themselves from the president, particularly for some immigration hardliners. But even Lindsey Graham himself has also been critical of this family separation policy and has said that it's bad news and that it needs to be reversed. I think as they're seeing increasing pressure on the White House to make a change, we're probably getting a sense that members of the House are hoping that by sort of playing good cop rather than bad cop, that they can be a productive member of the conversation. But look, this is not something House Republicans are happy about, and privately, it's something that deeply concerns them.
Jonathan, what does your reporting say? I imagine that the president doesn't actually want to sign this executive order, that the president wants to use this and continue to use this as leverage to get his wall built, leverage to end visa lottery and chain migration.
There's no question the president welcomes the fight on immigration. He has told people that we've reported around him the last week or so that he feels like this is a winning issue for him and his party. He thinks that this is the #1 reason why he's elected, that his very tough stance on immigration during the campaign, which of course includes the wall, is what propelled him to victory. He thinks that if Republicans are similarly tough before the midterms, that will be beneficial to them. Now, he is frustrated at how little progress there has been on the wall, and there's been sort of seized this opportunity as a chance to almost reestablish his credentials as being this hawk on immigration, believing that his base is going to go with him. Now, certainly there has been some pushback because of the imagery of the children. That is something that a lot of Republicans and some key White House aides have been uncomfortable with, although, as you're right to point out.
Why won't those key White House aides go on camera and say, I'm uncomfortable with this? I'm a little of the anonymous officials saying we don't really like this, or the anonymous officials saying, well, you know, it was Ivanka who really didn't like this, or it's the first lady who really doesn't like this.
No, it's striking, and in fact, I think it's telling that last night it was a closed-door meeting of Republicans that President Trump says to them, like, oh, Ivanka has said that she's worried about this isn't great, I should find a solution, but yet Ivanka Trump does not do that publicly. In fact, we just wrote a story for the AP that posted a few minutes ago asking that very question. Where is Ivanka Trump on this? She is someone who said she wanted to be in this West Wing as a force for good. She has embraced issues for the family, for children, and yet this is perhaps the most moral, the biggest crisis, the moral crisis this White House has faced when it comes to those issues, and she is, at least so far, nowhere to be found.
Silent.
You know, Ashley, I wanted to ask you about but there's the politics of this that Jonathan and Betsy and Katie were just talking about, but there's also a belief system. I mean, Stephen Miller, who many people have pointed to as sort of the driver behind this, and if you read the rhetoric, if you see what the president said the other day, we won't be a migrant center refugee camp, that's very clearly coming from him. He is a ideological believer, he and Jeff Sessions, in essentially making sure that immigration, legal and unauthorized, into the country is choked off, and that the demographics of the country stay the way they are and don't shift in the direction they're shifting. I mean, this is a first-order, deeply held principle of Stephen Miller since he was a young man in Santa Monica High School, right?
Yeah, that is right. This is someone, he had these views, as you said, in high school. I covered Congress when he worked for then Senator Sessions, and this was the key driving issue he was most passionate about. And the way to understand it, according to people I've spoken with, is not that he and Sessions are necessarily these puppet masters, but that they are the people who push the president towards what are his own sort of hard right instincts on immigration. So our understanding on what happened on this in particular was the president wanted to be, as Katie was mentioning before, tough on immigration. He was seeing numbers of people coming over the border. He didn't like that, and he sort of went to his aides and said, how can we stop this? How can we be tough? I don't want to be seen as weak. And so immediately, of course, Stephen Miller is ready with a lot of ways that the president can be tough. One of them was implementing this zero tolerance policy, and we haven't seen this yet, but one thing we were told, someone said, there are a lot of other, and they use this word, draconian immigration laws dating back decades that Stephen Miller and sort of is looking at, that the president could also choose to enforce and not discretionarily look away at. So in theory, what we're seeing now could be an opening salvo. That's not necessarily the case, but Stephen Miller is one of those people in the West Wing pushing the president to be as tough as possible.
There is a reason why Stephen Miller signed on to the campaign. There's a reason why Stephen Miller survived the whole campaign. There's a reason why Stephen Miller has survived this long in the White House. Actually, their views align when it comes to immigration. There wasn't a mistake that Donald Trump came out and started his campaign by saying Mexico was sending rapists and criminals over the border. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something he stumbled on with building the wall. These were plans that were put in place by Sam Nunberg and Roger Stone, what they thought would work in a Republican primary, what they thought would work to Donald Trump's advantage.
You're right. And there has been this myth at various points on immigration that Stephen Miller is, again, kind of this dark puppet master pulling and pushing the president to a place where he's not comfortable going. And that's simply not true. The president is not an ideologue. He doesn't have a lot of firmly held views. But as you and I both saw on the campaign trail, it is one and immigration is the other. And so there are moments, for instance, when the president is eager to get a deal where he may find himself moving more towards the center, or moments where he's hearing from, as allegedly, his daughter, or he's seeing photos that make him a little uncomfortable. But so Stephen Miller in those places can kind of play the role of moving the president back, but he's never making the president do something he doesn't want to do or do something he doesn't believe in. This is who Donald Trump is. This is what he ran on. This is what he believes. This is what he has been saying for decades before he got into politics.
That's right. I mean, Miller